Hello, welcome to my new series, the Three Battles series. So the idea of this is we're taking combat as a whole and dividing it into three categories that we can study and improve upon with our application work, with our fighting work. The idea of the three battles, they're the three physical battles that they take place. There's the upper quadrant region, there's the lower quadrant region, and then there's the aspect of fighting for balance. Typically, when you watch, like, say, for example, like a surveillance camera footage where you see natural fights start to happen or take place, they typically relate along the same lines. Whereas, like, they start to amp up and getting fisty, and then like one might push the other or throw a swing or something, and then there's this initial clash where they start going at each other, and then one of these people will like lose the clash. Doesn't necessarily mean they lose the fight right away. Sometimes they do. But at this point, like they might have taken a couple punches and they're starting to kind of backwards stumble as their wherewithal isn't quite there from taking the hits. And then from there, the person who won the clash just starts moving forward and smashing, right? And usually, in that case, the person who lost that initial clash is the one who ends up losing, because as they're stumbling backwards, they're keeping on taking hits, and then one might, lights out, or they might stumble, trip over themselves, and then the guy gets on top of them and starts beating them, right? So in this way, the most natural one of these battles that takes place is the upper quadrant region, or the battle of the hands, as I like to dub it, right? Everybody is very all about the hands, right? The natural instinct is, this is the closest thing to the face, and the face represents that kind of person that I don't like, right? That's the person, so I want to destroy that, right? So this is the thing that comes natural to us. It's also because it's very instinctual to our nature, right? Whenever we're reaching out to anything, we go hands first, right? It's how we explore the world, much in the same way that dogs explore with their mouth. So they're always, sniffing or tasting things, right? But we have that with our hands. So this is the thing that naturally comes to us. The battle of the balance tends to happen kind of accidentally by untrained people. Like, if you're trained, you're more likely to try and fight against their balance, or like fight to take their balance. But it kind of happens incidentally as the battle of the hands takes place. So in the example that I gave, right, like surveillance camera footage, right, the guy was just throwing punches. He wasn't necessarily trying to sweep or take balance or push or anything like that, but he's just swinging. And because the guy took a few, right, he's starting to stumble backwards. In that moment, he kind of incidentally took the guy's balance, because now he's stumbling backwards. And as he just keeps throwing punches, he keeps stumbling backwards. It keeps, the tide rolling against him, so to speak. So even if he didn't necessarily think, I need to take this guy's balance, he kind of took it incidentally. But the battle of the balance is one that's fought, like is fought by some, not by all. But the one that's typically forgotten about by most is the battle of the lower quadrant, or the battle of the legs. And just to be specific, why I also say battle of the hands and the upper quadrant, and battle of the legs and the lower quadrant, is because when you say upper quadrant, it implies anything is kind of happening within the space. So if you do high kicks, I'm not counting high kicks as the lower quadrant. I'm counting that as the upper quadrant, because it's in that same kind of area. And when you're talking about the lower quadrant, you can use, low punches, right, to still count to that. But I just like the way to talk about it as the hands and the legs quadrants, because it's a little bit easier on the tongue. So when I talk about the lower quadrant, I'm talking about any attacks kind of coming to the lower belt area, not just the groin, but the legs themselves. So within the Ma family that I practice, we essentially work on fighting the lower quadrant first. It's kind of our first go-to, because we're a northern Kung Fu style. So our tactics happen a lot within the lower body, within the legs, right? They say southern fists, northern legs. Northern legs doesn't mean kicks. It means legs, footwork, kicking tactics, all that stuff, right? All that's kind of summed up in the northern legs. So any type of thing where I'm, positioning my foot, sweeping around theirs, like I could sweep all the way through, or just hook behind their foot and then push them to trip them over the foot, or anything that's like, attacking the lower quadrant, or just stepping on their foot so it's not so easy for them to move, right? Anything like that that's happening. That's typically forgotten about for a lot of people. And even some trained people typically forget about this. One of the things that I notice when I'm having my students spar is that, again, the hands are the most obvious thing to them. So that's what they're doing most of the time. And they might come to a point where they kind of remember they should be attacking with their legs too. So it's like their body just kind of freezes up and they try to sweep the legs and then they go back to the hands thing, right? But rather than that, we're trying to get it so that all three of these battles happen simultaneously. And of course, this takes a lot of training to work all these in coordination together. But within time, it becomes just as natural as, fighting with the hands. So while I'm, dealing with people up here, I might be using devious footwork to trap their ankle or roll their ankle or trap their knee, right? Doing all those sorts of things while I'm also affecting their balance. So ways that I could say use the upper quadrant to attack the balance, right? I could block an incoming strike, right? Hook and grab the arm. I could push through their shoulder to kind of like destabilize them or control their spine. And I can use the sweeping footwork to pull out their leg, do a full sweep. So in that way, I used all three quadrants at the same time. So it's not necessarily like a distracting element. It's not like I have to, think hands, then feet, then balance, but rather they all need to work simultaneously and in coordination together naturally. I like to look at this from the perspective of infantry combat. So we have our main army, which we'll say is our hands, the upper quadrant, because this is the thing that everybody likes to focus on. And then we have these two flanking battalions. So one is the legs, one is the balance. Because most people focus on the main army, right? They kind of forget about these other two armies on the side here. And one might incidentally, have some leeway or get some orders, but they're mostly focusing on this main army here, which means that the person who's working all three battles has the advantage, right? It's a lot easier to fight three battles if you know you're fighting three battles, right? So if the person's only focusing on the main army, I'll send my main army to attack, and this will be like a stall battle. They'll keep attacking each other, trying to stall for time, while my other two battalions go, and because the main army on the enemy side is receiving all the orders, and they're not getting any orders on the sides here, they're being neglected and forgotten about, so they're being attacked by surprise, right? And because they're not, being ordered properly, then they start to lose the battle and they start to, get wiped out. And then once those two quadrants are wiped out, then our two other battalions can come in and flank to the main army and then sweep from there, right? So that's kind of how this whole thing is working, is that we try and use all three of these battles in sequence with each other so that our opponent will be overwhelmed because he'll be mostly focused up here, and if he's skilled, he'll be focused on these other areas. But if you're working in coordination with all three of these, it's like they get sensory information from too many places at once, and it kind of overwhelms them because they're getting, stuff up here, and then suddenly they're getting tripped down here, and then being pushed back here, and at some point it starts to overwhelm them. It's like trying to fight a big tidal wave that's just crashing over top of you. There's no way, right? So that's the key to understanding the three battles. So now that we understand the three battles, and this is the introduction video to understand what the point of this series is, every subsequent video from this series now is going to be an applications video where I'm going to show how these kinds of things can work. And I'm going to be using the Bagua, the 8 guas, same Bagua as in like Baguazhang, right? And I'm going to be using each gua to give a particular strategy of how to use in each of these battles. So for example, right, the heaven gua, I'll use that in a video to show how the hands can use the strategy of heaven gua to fight, and then I'll do another video focusing on how the legs can use the heaven theory to fight, and then the balance theory, right? And each gua represents a different type of change, a different type of tactic. So within those, we're learning different tactics for each of these three battles, and then by the end of it, you'll have a full system's worth of applications and understanding of martial theory from each of these 8 gua within 3 different contexts. Those contexts being the hands, the legs, and fighting for balance, more like wrestling type of stuff, right? So I hope you'll enjoy this series. I am already enjoying making it, so I'll see you in the next video.